ready to explore the unexpected. Let's dive deep into how we can wrap our heads around, or maybe more accurately, how we fail to wrap our heads around the things we never see coming.
Sounds like fun.
This journey, and hopefully a little bit of self-discovery along the way, is going to be guided by Nassim Taleb's The Black Swan.
A perfect roadmap for our deep dive.
By the time we're done here today, we're aiming to leave everyone with a little better understanding of how to navigate a world where the unexpected isn't just possible, it's a guarantee.
I like it. A world where the unexpected is just waiting around the corner.
Exactly.
Hey, Dad.
And that's what Taleb really hammers home, this idea of black swan events, those unpredictable events with huge consequences that completely reshape our world.
The things that really shake things up.
All right, so let's unpack one of his central ideas. It's called the problem of induction. Picture a chicken, right? Happily fed every single day of its life. So naturally, it assumes this trend, the free meals, it's all just going to keep going.
Makes sense. If it's always been that way, why would it change?
But what happens on that one day when the farmer has something else in mind?
Dinner time.
Exactly.
Uh,
The chicken situation shows us how relying solely on past experiences to figure out what's coming next, it can really mislead us.
It's thinking, I've been fed 1,000 times, so I'll definitely be fed on day 1001.
Right, but that's not always how things go. And this isn't a new idea either. Sextus Empiricus, a philosopher from about 1500 years ago, he nailed this problem.
Wow, that's going way back.
He did. So how does this chicken problem, this problem of induction, show up in our own lives? Well, we make routines, we build habits, and we make decisions based on the idea that things will just keep going the way they have been.
We assume a certain level of consistency.
But we all know life doesn't always play by our rules, right? Job losses, market crashes, pandemics, they all remind us how unprepared we can be when things veer off course.
When the rug gets pulled out from under us.
It's this human desire for order, for predictability, that steers us right into what Taleb calls the narrative fallacy.
Our brains love a good story.
They do. Our brains try to make sense of the unexplainable. We look for reasons, causes, connections, even when things might just be totally random.
Give me an example.
Remember that story about the insurance salesman on the plane to New York City?
I think so. Remind me.
He tells you this wild story about someone getting mugged in Central Park, and suddenly your whole trip feels different.
Even though the chances of actually getting mugged are super slim.
It's almost like our brains prioritize a good story over actual probabilities.
The power of anecdote.
And it's not just personal anecdotes. We see this all the time in media coverage, too. Let's say a candidate loses an election.
Happens all the time.
Right. So instantly, everyone's trying to find that one event, that one decision that caused the loss. They're crafting this neat little narrative when randomness probably played a much bigger role.
Trying to find the smoking gun.
The narrative fallacy basically shows how much we struggle to accept that the world is inherently chaotic.
We try to impose order through stories.
And we do it not just to explain the past, but also to make ourselves feel like we have some control over the future.
A sense of security.
But if we can be fooled by randomness, if we're prone to weaving narratives where they don't belong, what does that mean for us? How do we avoid falling into these traps?
That's a big question. How do we avoid that?
That's where understanding our own limitations, and even the limitations of experts, becomes so important.
I think we tend to put experts on a pedestal.
We do, especially in uncertain times. We look to them for guidance. But even with all their knowledge and experience, they can still fall prey to what Taleb calls black swan blindness.
We can't see those unexpected events coming either.
It's not that they can't see them. It's more like they don't even consider them as possibilities. It's what Taleb calls epistemic arrogance, overestimating the boundaries of their knowledge.
So they think they know more than they actually do.
In a way, yes. And the 2008 financial crisis is a stark example. Even Nobel Prize winners, with their intricate models and formulas, they didn't foresee that meltdown.
Their models couldn't predict it.
Their models, built on historical data, didn't factor in the possibility of an event of that magnitude, a true black swan.
Makes sense. The model can only account for what it's been fed.
Take Myron Scholes and Robert C. Merton, brilliant minds who created groundbreaking financial models.
Their models were highly regarded, weren't they?
They were. And yet their sophisticated tools failed when confronted with truly unpredictable events.
So where does that leave us?
This raises a crucial question. How much faith should we really put in expert opinions, especially when we're dealing with unpredictable situations? Even the most knowledgeable people can get caught off guard.
So, if we can't rely completely on past experiences or experts, and we're prone to making up stories, how do we make sense of the world and prepare for the unexpected?
That's where Umberto Eco's anti-library comes in.
Okay, I'm listening.
Eco, the brilliant author, had this enormous personal library. He noticed that some visitors were amazed by how many books he'd read,
Bragging rights.
but others understood that the real value was in the unread books,
In the books he hadn't gotten to yet.
the unexplored territories of knowledge.
Interesting.
Eco called this collection of unread books an anti-library. He believed it represented the vastness of our ignorance and the potential for growth that comes from exploring the unknown.
So, instead of sticking with what we know,
We should be venturing beyond the familiar.
makes you think.
It does. And this leads to a powerful question for you. What areas in your life could benefit from embracing your own anti-library?
I like that.
Where are you clinging to the familiar because it's comfortable or maybe out of fear? What unknown unknowns might be hiding just beyond your current knowledge?
Lots to think about there.
So how do we actually function in a world where these black swan events are a given? Well, Taleb suggests something called the barbell strategy.
What's that?
It means combining extreme risk aversion in certain areas with calculated risk-taking in others.
Like a barbell with weights on both ends.
Exactly. Picture a barbell. Heavy weights on each end, connected by a lighter bar in the middle. Taleb applies this to his own life, balancing long periods of intellectual exploration with bursts of intense physical activity.
So she's mixing things up.
He is. He's mimicking the randomness and variability that nature uses to build resilience.
Interesting concept.
Think about it. If we're constantly trying to be moderate in everything, it might actually make us more vulnerable to those unexpected shocks.
I see. Always playing it safe could backfire.
That leads to a question for you. How could you use this barbell approach in your own life? What safe areas could you balance with some well-thought-out risks?
I like how you bring it back to the listener.
It's all about giving people something to consider.
So we've talked about embracing the unknown and balancing risk. What else helps us weather those black swans?
Resilience isn't just about handling risk. It's also about incorporating redundancy.
Redundancy. But we live in a world obsessed with efficiency.
We do. We're constantly told to streamline, optimize, cut out anything that seems unnecessary. But redundancy, while it might seem wasteful, acts as a kind of insurance against black swans.
A safety net.
Think about savings. Having a healthy amount might seem inefficient compared to investing every dollar you have.
I see what you mean.
But it gives you a cushion if you lose your job or face unexpected medical bills.
It does.
Diversifying your investments spreads the risk, protecting you from a huge loss in any one area. Developing multiple skills makes you more adaptable and less dependent on any single source of income.
It's about having options.
Basically, redundancy, which often has a negative connotation in our efficiency-driven world, can be a powerful tool for building robustness against those unpredictable black swan events.
It makes us less fragile.
So, where in your life are you overly optimized? Where could you benefit from a little more redundancy? It's a good exercise to think about how vulnerable you are to the unexpected and take steps to create a more resilient life.
Good advice.
Now, are you ready for a truly mind-bending concept?
Lay it on me.
Taleb's fourth quadrant.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Imagine a matrix with two axes. One represents how simple or complex a system is, and the other represents how predictable its outcomes are. The fourth quadrant is where you find complex systems with unpredictable outcomes, things like finance, economics, and politics.
I'm starting to see where this is going.
These systems, with their intricate connections and emergent properties, are incredibly difficult to model and predict.
Too many moving parts.
You could say that.
Yeah.
And here's the danger. Traditional statistical models, often based on bell curve distributions, just aren't equipped to handle the dynamics of this fourth quadrant.
They weren't built for that.
They were designed for mediocristan, the realm of the average and the predictable, not for extremistan, where black swans rule.
I see. So trying to apply those models to the fourth quadrant is a recipe for disaster.
It is.
Yeah.
It's like trying to sail through a hurricane with a compass that only points north.
Not very helpful.
Not at all. It won't give you an accurate picture of what's going on.
Mm.
So what areas in your life fall into this fourth quadrant? Your career, your investments, your relationships.
That's a good question to think about.
Recognizing that these areas are inherently prone to black swans can lead to more informed and realistic decisions. It's about understanding that control is often an illusion, and that even the best laid plans can be instantly overturned.
Humility is key.
And that's where we'll pause for now, right at the edge of uncertainty. This deep dive into the Black Swan has been a fascinating journey so far.
It has.
We've seen how our assumptions and biases can blind us to the possibility of the unexpected, and how even experts can be caught off guard.
Right. We explored those limitations.
We've also talked about some practical ways to navigate a world where black swans are unavoidable, from embracing our anti-libraries to building redundancy into our lives.
Sound strategies.
Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll dig even deeper into Taleb's ideas and look at how to make better decisions in a world that just loves to surprise us.
I'll be here, back for more. Great. Let's keep exploring the Black Swan and delve into what Taleb calls the fallacy of silent evidence, an idea that exposes how what we don't see can really warp our perspective.
Okay, I'm all ears. What's this fallacy all about?
Picture a battlefield, all right? You see the victors, the ones who made it out alive. But what about all those soldiers who didn't make it? Their stories, their experiences, they vanish. That's silent evidence in a nutshell. We focus on what happened, but we forget about all the things that could have happened but didn't.
So it's like acknowledging those roads not taken, those potential outcomes that never came to be.
Exactly. It's about grasping that our view of the past, it's often incomplete. It's shaped by what Taleb calls survivorship bias. We tend to celebrate those who succeeded while overlooking all those who tried and failed along the way.
It's like focusing on the winners and ignoring everyone else.
Right. It's a distorted view. Think about those Cuban refugees who, for years, they kept their suitcases half-packed. They were convinced they'd return home soon.
Holding on to that hope.
They clung to the idea of a reversed fortune, a narrative that aligned with their desires, while ignoring the, perhaps more likely scenario, that their exile would become permanent.
They were focused on a specific outcome.
And their experience shows us how zeroing in on certain evidence, it can really twist our perceptions and lead us to make bad decisions.
So how do we avoid that selective focus?
Let's switch gears for a second. Think about Giacomo Casanova. The guy lived a life full of risks and gambles, but he lived to a ripe old age, escaping duels, prisons, all sorts of dangerous situations.
Sounds like he had a knack for getting out of trouble.
Right. His escapades suggest he had exceptional skill, a real talent for navigating danger. But, and here's the catch, could this interpretation be overlooking something crucial?
What are we missing?
Luck. Casanova's survival, just like anyone who's faced a ton of risk, it's partly due to plain old luck. Had things gone differently, his story could have ended very badly.
So we might be giving him too much credit for his survival skills.
We might be. His success, when you look at it through the lens of the fallacy of silent evidence, reminds us to separate skill from luck. Even the most accomplished people can't totally escape the whims of fate.
It makes you wonder how much control we actually have.
It does, and that brings us to the heart of Taleb's argument. If randomness can fool us, if silent evidence clouds our judgment, how can we make good decisions, especially when the stakes are high?
So how do we navigate that?
This is where Taleb challenges our reliance on experts. We often turn to them for guidance, trusting their expertise. But as we've already seen, even experts can miss those black swan events.
Right, because they can't predict everything.
And their models, their predictions, they can be overly precise, driven by a need for certainty rather than an accurate reflection of what's really going on.
So their desire for certainty can actually work against them.
Taleb calls this the expert problem, and he says it's especially common in areas where there's a lot of uncertainty. Fields where the boundaries of knowledge are blurry and the potential for the unforeseen is high.
Like trying to predict the weather too far in advance.
Let's say we have Dr. John, a meticulous actuary working for an insurance company.
Okay, I'm picturing him.
He lives a very structured life, meticulously planning his days, avoiding any deviations from his routine. Dr. John is what Taleb would call a Brooklyn type. Someone who values order and predictability, finds comfort in the familiar, and trusts established systems and expertise.
Sounds like he likes to be in control.
But, as we've learned, this way of thinking can be dangerous in a world shaped by black swans.
Because those unexpected events can throw everything off.
Exactly. Dr. John's dependence on historical trends and established risk models makes him vulnerable to anything that falls outside his neatly defined world.
He doesn't account for the unexpected.
He's that chicken we talked about earlier, expecting tomorrow to be just like yesterday, completely unaware of what the farmer has in store.
So who does Taleb offer as a contrast to Dr. John?
Enter Fat Tony, a street-smart guy who thrives in a world of constant change and uncertainty.
Okay, I'm curious.
He doesn't rely on fancy models. Instead, he trusts his gut, his street smarts, his ability to read people and situations. Fat Tony embodies what we could call the non-Brooklyn mindset, embracing the unpredictable, skeptical of grand narratives, and always ready for the unexpected.
So two very different approaches to life.
Taleb uses these contrasting figures to highlight the limitations of formal expertise, especially in areas where black swans are common. He's suggesting that while specialized knowledge is important, it can become a weakness when it leads to overconfidence and an inability to adapt to unforeseen circumstances.
It's like being so focused on the map that you miss what's right in front of you.
Exactly. So we're left with this question: how do we reconcile these seemingly opposite approaches? How do we use expert insights without falling prey to their potential blind spots?
It's finding that balance, isn't it?
It is. The answer lies in understanding that knowledge has limits, both our own and that of others. It's about recognizing that expertise, while valuable in certain situations, doesn't make anyone immune to those black swan events.
So we need to be aware of our own biases, our tendency to prefer good stories over hard data, and stay alert to the allure of the fallacy of silent evidence. We should also remember that the world is much more intricate and unpredictable than we can fully grasp.
Well said. And this brings us back to the fourth quadrant, that space where complex systems and unpredictable outcomes collide. It's where our traditional models and risk assessments fall apart, where black swans aren't just possibilities, but practically guaranteed.
It's a realm that seems to resist our attempts to impose order and predictability. It forces us to confront the limits of what we know and the fundamental uncertainty of the future.
And Taleb argues that trying to apply traditional statistical methods to the fourth quadrant is inherently flawed. These methods, which are based on the idea of normal events and bell curve distributions, they simply can't capture the dynamics of complex systems, where extreme events aren't outliers, they're the norm.
It's like trying to measure the ever-changing coastline with a ruler, like Benoit Mandelbrot, the guy who pioneered fractal geometry, pointed out.
The coastline's infinite complexity can't be accurately measured with those traditional linear tools.
It's too complex, too dynamic.
And that's where complexity theory comes in handy. It emphasizes emergent properties, feedback loops, and nonlinear relationships, giving us a more nuanced way to understand the fourth quadrant. Complexity theory recognizes that, in these systems, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Even small changes can trigger cascading effects, making predictions nearly impossible, even with tons of data.
So it embraces the messiness.
It does. So how do we navigate this tricky territory where black swans lurk and our usual tools fail?
Give us some guidance.
Taleb suggests a frenetic approach to decision-making when faced with uncertainty. He advises against putting too much faith in overly precise predictions, recognizing that they're often driven by a craving for certainty rather than an accurate picture of reality.
So don't get too attached to specific predictions.
Right. He recommends a more adaptable and subtle approach, one that acknowledges the inherent limitations of what we know and the constant possibility of the unexpected.
Being open to being wrong.
Exactly. He warns against excessive optimization, arguing that while streamlining systems and eliminating redundancy might make things more efficient in the short term, it also makes them more susceptible to unforeseen shocks.
So a little bit of wastefulness in the form of redundancy could actually be a good thing.
Precisely. Redundancy, often seen as inefficient, can act as a crucial buffer against black swans, providing a safety net when things inevitably deviate from our carefully laid plans. Taleb also stresses the value of negative advice, focusing on what not to do rather than prescribing specific actions to guarantee success.
So focusing on avoiding mistakes.
He argues that in the fourth quadrant, where the downside risks can be huge, avoiding catastrophic losses is often the most important thing. It's about recognizing that survival is often the biggest win in a world ruled by uncertainty.
It's about staying in the game.
Exactly. So instead of trying to control outcomes, we should focus on building systems and strategies that can withstand those inevitable shocks and disruptions.
Shifting our focus from prediction to preparation.
That's it. Taleb's approach isn't about getting rid of risk altogether. That's impossible in our complex world. It's about managing risk intelligently, knowing that our knowledge has limits, and creating systems that can weather the storms.
Systems that can bend without breaking.
That's a great way to put it. And this brings us to a key question. How do we apply these principles to our own lives, the systems we're part of, the choices we make every day? Let's look at some real-world examples in Part 3. We'll examine how Taleb's insights can equip us to navigate the fourth quadrant with greater awareness and resilience.
And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the Black Swan. We've explored so much already, from the problem of induction to that fallacy of silent evidence,
Mhm.
and we even took a trip into the mind-boggling world of the fourth quadrant.
It's been quite a journey.
We've talked about how our own knowledge has limits, how relying solely on experts can be tricky, and how crucial it is to build redundancy and resilience into our lives, into our systems.
Laying the groundwork.
Exactly. Now, let's get practical and see how these principles play out in real-life scenarios.
Yeah.
Let's start with the big one, a global issue that's on everyone's mind. Climate change.
A hot topic, for sure.
Climate change really embodies a fourth quadrant dilemma, wouldn't you say?
It does. We're dealing with a complex system with potentially catastrophic outcomes.
There's a lot of uncertainty around those outcomes, isn't there?
A lot. And traditional models struggle to grasp the intricacies of it all, the feedback loops, the tipping points, the unforeseen consequences. It's a multifaceted challenge.
So how do we make decisions when faced with such immense uncertainty? Where do we even begin?
Taleb's framework urges us to be cautious. He advocates for a precautionary principle.
What does that mean exactly?
It means that when the potential consequences of an action are severe and irreversible, it's smarter to avoid that action, even if the likelihood of those consequences happening seems low.
Better safe than sorry.
Exactly. It's like driving on a mountain road with no guardrails, a steep drop-off on one side. Even if you're a confident driver, it's wise to proceed slowly and carefully, given the potential for disaster if you make a mistake.
A very vivid image.
And this principle applies beyond climate change. It's relevant to any situation where you're dealing with complex systems and the potential for catastrophic black swans.
So it has broad applications.
It does. Whether it's regulating financial markets, developing new technologies, or even making personal choices, recognizing that our knowledge has limits and leaning towards caution can help us avoid disastrous outcomes.
Doesn't this emphasis on caution stifle progress or innovation, though? I mean, we have to take risks to move forward, don't we?
Of course. But it's not about avoiding risk altogether. It's about approaching things with a healthy dose of skepticism, acknowledging that unintended consequences are always possible and putting safeguards in place to minimize risk.
So calculated risks, not reckless ones.
Exactly. Taleb actually champions a barbell approach to innovation.
Like the barbell strategy we talked about earlier.
Yeah. It's the same idea. It's about combining small, incremental experiments with occasional bold ventures. It's about fostering both exploration and prudent risk management.
I see. So it's about finding that balance.
He also emphasizes the importance of decentralization,
What do you mean by that?
spreading out authority and decision-making across multiple entities rather than concentrating them in a few powerful institutions.
And why is that important?
It makes systems more resilient to black swans. Think about how fragile those big interconnected banks were during the 2008 financial crisis. If the financial landscape had been more decentralized with more diversity among institutions, the ripple effects of the crisis might have been much smaller.
So don't put all your eggs in one basket.
That's the idea. And this principle applies to more than just finance. In a world where everything's so interconnected and failures can cascade quickly, decentralization offers a vital buffer against those systemic shocks.
It's about spreading the risk.
Exactly. As we wrap up our exploration of the black swan, what are the main takeaways we can apply to our lives, our work, and how we view the world?
What have we learned?
The most fundamental lesson is this. The world is far more unpredictable than we tend to think.
We like to think we have things figured out.
We crave order and predictability. This leads us to underestimate how often those black swan events happen and how big their impact can be.
We forget that those unexpected events are always lurking.
We fall for the narrative fallacy, making up stories to explain random things, searching for comfort in an illusion of control.
Trying to make sense of the chaos.
And we put too much trust in experts, forgetting that even the most knowledgeable people can be caught off guard by the unexpected.
We forget that they're human too.
We focus on the visible successes, but we neglect all the silent evidence of countless failures and near misses. But recognizing that our knowledge has limits and that black swans are inevitable, it's not a reason to despair. It's actually an empowering shift in perspective.
It's a change in how we view the world.
It is. It's a call to embrace intellectual humility, to challenge assumptions, to stay open to new information, and to cultivate resilience in our lives and systems. It's about understanding that real success in a world shaped by black swans doesn't come from predicting the future.
It comes from preparing for its inherent uncertainty.
Perfectly put. Let's condense our deep dive into 10 key points for everyone to take away.
Sounds good. Give us the top 10.
First, Black Swan events. They're those unpredictable events with huge consequences that reshape history and our lives.
Second, the problem of induction. It reminds us that relying only on past trends to predict the future can be misleading.
Third, the narrative fallacy. That's our tendency to create stories and explanations even for random events because we're always trying to find order in chaos.
Fourth, experts. Even with all their knowledge, they can be overconfident and blind to the possibility of those black swans.
Fifth, Umberto Eco's anti-library concept. It encourages us to embrace all that we don't know as a source of learning and growth.
Sixth, the barbell strategy. That's combining extreme risk aversion in some areas with calculated risk-taking in others, mimicking nature's resilience.
Seventh, redundancy. It might seem inefficient, but it makes us robust against black swans. It acts as a safety net when things go wrong.
Eighth, the fourth quadrant. That's where those complex systems with unpredictable payoffs exist. It defies traditional models and requires a different way of making decisions.
Ninth, understanding that our knowledge has limits and that black swans are inevitable. This shouldn't paralyze us. It's an invitation to see the world in a more nuanced and empowering way.
And finally, number 10.
Embracing a mindset that accounts for black swans. It can lead to more informed and resilient decisions, allowing us to navigate uncertainty with greater awareness and adaptability. This deep dive has really only scratched the surface of Taleb's insightful work. We encourage everyone to explore these concepts further, challenge your own thinking, and embrace the adventure of navigating a world where the unexpected isn't just possible, it's inevitable.
Couldn't have said it better myself. This deep dive has given us a lot to think about. Thanks for joining us on this exploration of the Black Swan. Until next time, stay curious, stay skeptical, and stay resilient.